In this video, we're going to go over the complete installation of your new Xtreme mower clutches and our installation instructions. We strongly recommend that you take a look at those instructions. They're written pretty well. This video kind of covers that and a few other things. And we also recommend that you wear safety glasses. You're working on this lawnmower clutch. It's not the nicest under there, and protect your eyes. It's always a good idea. To start this by going line to line, number one, is inspecting the electrical system. That is absolutely mandatory and critical. You want to make sure that your new clutch doesn't fail. Even if it was just a bearing failure, you want to make sure that it's getting the proper current so the this clutch doesn't fail. So what we recommend, a shortcut, an easy way to do this: start your engine, take it to full throttle without the clutch on, and take your meter, set it to DC, and check the voltage at the battery. Now at that point, we're not really looking at the voltage at the battery. We're not looking at the battery. We're looking at what the engine is putting out. These clutches, all clutches, they need to see between 13.4 and 14 volts DC. So it's 13.4 to 14. If you are outside of that range, do not run your new clutch. Go back to our website. Video 2 and 3 talk about problems with current. If the current is too low, the clutch will slip, overheat, and burn up. If the voltage is too high, we're sending too much current into the coil, it will do the exact same thing. It will overheat that coil and destroy your new clutch. So you notice we have this big warning label that says check system voltage. That's a critical part of the installation process. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that everything is good in that regard. The next thing is to go ahead and get you some side cutters and remove all of your tie wraps. When you're doing that, pay attention to the main wire harness where the clutch plugs into, and make sure we don't have any chafing damage to that wire. You're going to want to go over it pretty good and just give it a good looking over to make sure that there's nothing that didn't rub against some muffler or something and damage it, to make sure that that's all intact. The next thing is removing the belt. What we have to do is find the deck tensioner. Normally there's a pivoting bracket with a big spring, and what we're going to want to do is compress that and take the deck belt off. Some of those have a spot where you can put a ratchet, a 1/2 inch ratchet. There'll be a square hole. That square hole, so you can compress that spring and go ahead and take off that drive belt for the deck. So get the belt out of your way. The next thing is kind of an important one, and it's number 4, and you see the exclamation point. It talks about paying attention to where everything was, how the clutch rotation is. Number 5, it talks about that. In other words, how is this clutch mounted? Is the pulley facing the engine clockwise, or is the pulley facing away from the engine counterclockwise? You want to make sure that you put the new one on back correctly. You're also looking for spacers. In a lot of applications, they'll put spacers between, say, a dry pulley, right, and the clutch, and that's to get the crankshaft to terminate in the proper place. So if it's got a spacer in there, you want to make sure to put that spacer back in. Or some of our clutches come with spacers. Some of the conversions that we do, you want to make sure that if our clutch comes with a spacer, to make sure that you get that spacer on, because the clutch will fail without them. They're definitely a big reason. We actually have a video, it's called The Column, and it discusses the compression of a clutch, crankshaft end termination, and so on. So if you have any questions about that, refer to that video. So I like to point out there's a few clutches on the market that when the spacers go on, some of them, and I apologize, we don't have that particular one, but that the spacer is cup shaped, and that the key is that the spacer or the cup, in the instance of those types, that they push on the inner race of the bearing. So you got to pay attention to which way those spacers or cups in that case come off. So number 4 and 5 just purely talks about paying attention to everything, how it comes off, so when we put it back together, that all those things get in place. Number 6 is just removing the clutch. Now, this is a place where you can use an impact. In fact, it's probably the best way. Grab an impact wrench if you have one and take the main bolt out and remove your clutch, unplug the wire, so on and so forth. Number 7 talks about preparing the crankshaft for the new clutch. Now, like this one, it doesn't look very good. Normally it's rusted or there's some corrosion and grease, but you'll want to make sure to clean that real good. Paying strong attention to the groove itself, because remember, we have a key inside the clutch that's going to work into that groove. So clean that groove out real good and make it much easier for you to install the clutch. And if the ends have, they should have a nice chamfer on there. If they don't, go ahead and file a nice lead-in chamfer to make your life easy when you put the new clutch on. Now, if your old clutch bearing failed, which is a common failure with clutches, it's very possible that this crankshaft saw tremendous amounts of heat, possibly more than 300 degrees, and in which case they swell. They'll actually get a little bigger, and when they cool down and contract, they don't quite come back to the same shape that they were, and the clearances are very close. So when we're installing this, you want to make sure, grab some WD-40 and emery paper and clean that up real good. If you're having a lot of trouble getting your new clutch on, we have a video that talks specifically about some tricks about doing that. But number 7 is cleaning and inspecting that crankshaft and getting it ready for the installation. Number 8 is installing your new clutch. So as we go back to number 4, paying attention to where all the spacers were and so on, that's what we're talking about there, is to go backwards, to go ahead and put, if you had a spacer, put your dry pulley on the spacer, whatever you had in there before, and go ahead and get those lined up and put on. Next up is actually installing the clutch itself. Now, you have to be a little patient. Sometimes that process is a little tricky. Inside the clutch, you'll see a key. That key has to line up with the key and the crankshaft. So you'll want to inspect that to make sure that it hasn't got, a little burr or something like that on it, right? And when you go ahead and install your new clutch up into the crankshaft, what you're going to want to do is align that key with the keyway. And firmly press on the clutch, moving it a little back and forth until you catch that key, and eventually she'll pop in. Never, ever, ever strike the clutch with a hammer. If it does not go on with your bare hands, there is something wrong. Pull it back off and check the crankshaft, check the key inside, make sure everything is okay, and understand that it is not necessarily an easy process. They often go on hard. I personally remember setting it down and letting my arms rest as I had difficulty putting them on here and there. Next thing is to go ahead and get your bolt. You should have this ready, by the way, before you put the clutch on. And make sure it's clean and dry. We don't want any Loctite, no anti-seize on the threads of this bolt. We want it clean and dry. And thread it up into the crank. And this is the time when you need to use a torque wrench. Do not put this bolt in with an impact wrench. The reason is, and there's actually a video on this, is that when we torque this clutch to the 55 foot-pounds, in this case it will be 55, we're actually exerting 6,000 pounds of force against the inner race of this bearing. It's important to understand that if we go over that number with an impact wrench, that we could actually load the bearings and shorten the life of those bearings in the clutch. So this is one of those cases where you really need to use a torque wrench, like a head bolt or something like this, where it's a critical bolted joint. Now, at 55 foot-pounds, that's the point in which, in this case, this is a 7/16, very common size for lawnmowers. That's the point when the bolt actually yields. It actually stretches a little. So that's why it's critical to put it there. We're actually creating a perfect bolted joint at that 55 foot-pounds of torque. That's also why you don't want to use Loctite or anti-seize, because you've created a slippery joint. So clean and dry, 55 foot-pounds. Okay, once that's in, we move on to step 13, which talks about anti-rotation brackets. Now this is kind of a real critical area. You want to make sure that, and it's just a quick inspection, normally this is quick and easy, that anti-rotation is not bound on the clutch, right? It needs to be free. You see how I can move this one around? Now I need both radial movement and axial movement. If this anti-rotation is bound on the clutch will fail. So we need that to be loose, oddly enough. The next thing is to connect all of your wires. Now, all of our clutches come with an integrated, watertight, impact-resistant wire harness. Now, this one doesn't have the protective sheathing that it'll get later down the assembly line, but they all come that way, and we do that on purpose. We're not big fans of a non-watertight connection at the base of a electromagnetic coil, so we don't like this. So what you need to do is take you have one on your mower now, follow it up, unplug it at the main wire harness and throw it away. And plug ours in there. Now you'll see some goop in here. We do that on purpose. That's a dielectric grease that we put in there to ensure that you get a good connection. Now, once you've got that plugged in, make sure, and this is kind of a very important part, we see a lot of failures on this one, is to route that wire in a way that the belt isn't going to chafe it, and that it's maybe not rubbing against a muffler or something. And again, inspect that real good and make sure that it's not banjoed where it's, as the clutch moves, it's going to tear the wire out of the clutch. And then tie wrap it up and use your side cutters to cut the excess away. And again, making sure that nothing is going to rub on that. The last thing requires a little explanation. This particular type of clutch, these are the blade brakes. That's what stops the blades within some federally regulated times. It's a safety item, right? Well, as clutches get old, those weaken. And in fact, I've seen clutches that the brakes were gone. You could turn the pulley with your hands at free spin, so on and so forth. So your blades are slowing down. They're slowing down. They run until they stop. Right? Now we're going to stop those blades kind of quickly. So if your lawnmower blades are loose at all, you can actually loosen the blades up. So you're going to want to get your manual out, torque your lawnmower blades in. That's what number 15 is here, back to spec, to make sure that these new, now strong and like new brakes that are going to stop those blades quickly, they don't loosen on you. Last step is burnishing your new clutch. This is absolutely critical. When I'm going to take this clutch apart to kind of explain this process a little bit. We actually have a video on it, but this is kind of a basic process. This is a rotor and an armature. These are the two things that come together and grip. If we don't burnish the clutch, these two surfaces don't get a chance to break in. And your clutch, you could, if you go out and mow, which a lot of cases your grass is really long because you've been waiting for your new lawnmower clutch, and you're going to put this thing through some punishment, and in that you could slip and warp this brand new armature and damage your clutch forever. So burnishing is quite easy process. You take your deck up into the top position, go into an open area where no one's around, right? And put your throttle to half throttle, engage the blades, let them run till they get full speed, and disengage, let them completely stop. Do that process 10 times. If you have a higher horsepower engine, or like we recommend with diesels, make it 20. You want, and that gives that a chance for those two surfaces, without having a load on them like cutting grass, to break in properly without generating a tremendous amount of heat and the potential for slipping. And it wears those together and brings the torque of the clutch up to, like in this case, this is a 205 foot-pound clutch. It'll bring it up to that number before you start to cut your grass. That should do it. Thank you for purchasing an Xtreme mower clutch. Good luck with your installation.